Hello, and welcome to Conversations. I'm Jim Below, your host. Very honored and pleased to have joining me today Congressmember Debbie Dingell from the 12th District here in Michigan. Welcome back to Conversations.
It's great to be with you, and happy holidays.
Yes, happy holidays, and I assume the holidays don't really let up as far as the amount of work and the type of work you are doing. You've been back, yesterday?
Correct.
And my understanding is you met with representatives of various community officials and that, talking about something we've talked about before here, and that is the environmental concern about what's referred to as the Gellman plume. What is your role about a local issue?
So I've been elected 5 years, or served now for 5 years at the end of this month, the beginning of next month. And the dachshund plume, the Gellman dachshund plume, has clearly been an issue in Washtenaw County, well, quite frankly, for 40 years. So I went to many meetings and heard everybody yelling at each other, didn't know what I should say or what the issues, or et cetera. But one of the questions, questions that have been going on since this occurred was, should EPA become involved and should it be declared a Superfund site, or is the state doing an adequate job? Was the private sector doing an adequate job? So EPA came in now about 2 years ago because some of the communities in the Sierra Club had filed a request asking that it be designated a Superfund site.
What does that mean?
Well, if it's designated under CERCLA as a toxic substance and a Superfund site, EPA would come in and oversee the cleanup of the site, and they have tools in their toolbox that would require the polluter to pay. But this is probably one of the more complicated issues because there are several municipalities, 4 of them to be exact, that are impacted by it, and other groups, Sierra Club, here in Watershed Council, the AG's office, Eagle, which used to be DEQ. And quite frankly, there are so many players and of groups that have existed from the very beginning trying to get it cleaned up, that people were being pitted against each other and progress wasn't being made. And the communities weren't all in agreement. So when EPA called me and said, we've been here a year, we either have to move forward or we're going to be stepping out, I called everybody together, and I tried to have a meeting where people weren't screaming at each other, they were talking to each other. And after that meeting, the communities, Ann Arbor, Washtenaw County Commissioners, Scioto Township, and Ann Arbor Township, said 3 of those townships are party to a lawsuit that they've been trying to reach a consent decree on, as well as some external parties. And everybody came together at one meeting. I'm not part of the lawsuit, so I'm not part of the confidential discussions, but had a discussion among all of themselves about how we take this forward. So they've been working on trying to get a consent decree. Some people think, I don't know what's happening. I want to make that really clear. I'm not party to it, so I'm one of those people that can't know anything anyway.
But being somewhat impartial, it's better to have someone like you be able to sit down and bring people, as you say, without necessarily them arguing against each other, to say, all right, what are the issues, what can be done, what's the best approach?
But one of the things, I do think this has been going on for 40 years and it's continuing to spread. I think everybody's got to be on the same page. I get a lot of questions, and rather than my saying what EPA can do or not do, what the tools in their box, how long will it take, what are the tools in the state's toolbox? You have a Democratic governor now who the governor and I and the Attorney General are all trying to stay on the same page. And EPA cannot come in unless the state agrees to or requests them to come in. So everybody's got to be on the same page. So last night I told them that I'd talked to EPA, that I'd talked to Eagle, and that everybody's going to be in the same room in a calm way. We're not going to yell at each other. We're not going to have people that are going to go on for, monologues that don't get anything accomplished, but have people answer the questions. What would happen if EPA came in? What tools do they have? What's their goal in cleaning up the site? How long would it take? Would they take if they request it, will they take it? What time is going to be lost? What's the role of the state? Some people are frustrated. Some think the state's the right place to do. And I think that the sooner that people can be transparent and public about what is going on in these closed negotiations, people would feel a lot better, because when people don't have the information, they don't know what's happening.
You mentioned that there was a meeting yesterday, Thursday.
Yes.
What's the next step then?
So EPA, Eagle, Attorney General's office will be together in a same meeting on January 16th with the 4 communities and other interested parties to ask questions, have them answered, and then the 4 communities will have to decide.
As you said, it's not the state, it's not you, it's not EPA, it's those 4 communities that are directly impacted.
The ones that are directly, here's the reality. At any point, the state could ask EPA to come in, but the governor has to agree to it. The state has to ask. And I think all of us don't think it's our decision to make. Yeah. We need to facilitate what's happening, but these 4 communities. But what's happened, for 40 years, they've been pitted against each other. And it doesn't, that's part of, I think that's been some people's goal, to keep people from agreeing with each other and going separate ways. It's not getting cleaned up. Well, this site needs to be cleaned up. 40 years is enough.
I would say environmentally, another area that you've been looking at and working on is the whole issue of climate. And you recently were in Madrid with other representatives of the legislature for a international conference, or?
So this was the United Nations Global Climate Summit. So I was very honored to be asked to be part of the official delegation. Speaker Pelosi led it to say we're still in.
Yeah.
As you know, President Trump decided to take us out of the Paris Climate Agreement. We have voted in the House that we should not be leaving it. We should be staying in it. And while we were there, we met with the United Nations General Secretary, the King of Spain, the Prime Minister, but more importantly, the activists, the scientists, the NGOs that are all working on this issue. So it was an important meeting and a lot of important conversations.
Simply reaffirming that the House, commitment to the ongoing discussion and efforts to reduce pollution.
We need to do more than talk. We need to act. It's one of the reasons that I'm very proud that I was one of the lead sponsors of legislation that takes what the United Nations has identified as a necessary to eliminate or net carbon 100% carbonless in 2050.
So what can you do? What can the legislature do when you have the president say we're pulling out of this agreement?
Well, we've got an election next year, so we're going to, right now, we're going to work to get 100% by 50, continue to push forward. There is a global climate select committee that is going to be making a number of recommendations next year, but in the meantime, we're working on a lot of different pieces of legislation. So this 100% by 50 is a major piece. Yesterday, I introduced a Global Climate Bank, which would help encourage technology development. There are some things we know that we can do now.
And it doesn't take the government to do it, or approval of the government.
We've done this in this. The state's been a leader in trying to go to renewable fuels, and everybody was afraid of. What we have to do is not be afraid. We need to put everybody at the table and work together. We want to make sure that that labor and workers are at the table, and we're talking about new green jobs. We need to help the transportation industry. We are the home of the automobile. Transportation is almost 30% of that goal. We're not going to put people out of work. We're going to develop. We want to stay at the forefront of innovation and technology. Get electric vehicles or hydrogen or what is the mode of transportation. People were very afraid of sun and solar and wind, and they thought it was going to be expensive. It wasn't going to be real. It's much cheaper than everybody thought, and it's working. Now we've got to develop better ways to store the energy when it's created, to put it out into the grid. We need to redo the grid.
You mentioned bringing people together and getting, you could say, both sides sit down and discuss things. One of the things recently you were involved in is a bipartisan effort to address the issue of prescription drug costs. And that it seems like everything in Washington is the Democrats versus Republicans and nothing is ever bipartisan. But my understanding is this was.
Well,
Somewhat.
yes and no. We did pass H.R. 3, which
Yeah.
is a beginning, in the House this week. We've got to do something. The president said that he was going to lower prescription drugs. Republicans have made that promise, and we have. I mean, you can't be out there talking to people and not know how scared to death people are of what the cost is for the prescription drugs. You know, I was focused on this today. I went in to get my inhaler filled, which I had never paid attention to until a mother at a town hall got up and I have insurance, but my copay is $100. And I can't get a 90-day supply. I have to pay $100 every month. It's $1,200 for me. This mother was working 2 jobs, still at the poverty line, and the inhaler is $800. She can't, her child needs it. And we've talked about insulin. We all know that the price of insulin or the EpiPen, we've got to do something. Every other industrialized...
Well, what did the legislature that did get approved address?
The legislation that passed yesterday, and by the way, I've met with the Secretary of HHS and the White House Head of Congressional Affairs, and we're all trying to say, what can we work on together to get this done? So I'm hoping that we're going to keep working to get this done. What we did yesterday would be allow HHS, the Health and Human Services, to negotiate with Medicare to lower prescription drug prices of the most used drugs, and that would also be passed on to people with private insurance. And we have to do something. It's a real, and it would be 50, up to 50 drugs for the first negotiations. For me, that's a start, but it's important. We've got to do something because every other industrialized nation, they have lowered drug prices. And why? Because those prices, the governments are negotiating those prices.
Well, we're going to take a short break, come back and talk about the issue that seems or will be occupying the House next week, and ask our viewers to stay with us. We'll be back in just a moment.
Ann Arbor Inclusive. We support the community of people with special needs.
Uh-oh, you've just discovered that you are a senior citizen. What do you do now? Well, one thing you can do is watch Senior Moments. You'll be encouraged as you learn about activities, meet interesting people, and discover that there really is a lot for you to do. The show also provides information about health, finances, and entertainment. So don't miss Senior Moments to make your senior life better than ever.
Hello and welcome back to Conversations. I'm speaking today with Debbie Dingell, Congress member from the 12th District here in Michigan. And next week when you return to Washington, the topic that's been occupying a lot of discussion in the media and among people, and I'm sure members of Congress, is the impeachment issue. Today, the House Judiciary Committee voted to send to the full House, 2 counts for potential impeachment. Before getting to that, what explain what has taken place so far? Because people aren't always clear on sort of the process.
So people have been calling for impeachment for a long time. And I was someone, and I am, as I sit here with you today, that's still very worried about how divided this country is. And I want to say this before we get into the process. It has been documented by many people that Russia is trying to divide us as a country. And I think some days they're succeeding quite well. But intelligence agencies from other democracies around the world know that Russia's trying to destabilize democracies. And I would ask us to all realize how lucky we are to live in this country. And at this point in my life, I didn't think I'd be worried about freedom of speech, freedom of religion, freedom of the press. And we just all need to think about that. So last summer, I was when there were some people that were probably unhappy with me because I was worried about this division and I wasn't going to fan it. But when we got reports that a whistleblower had gone to a President Trump-appointed Inspector General, and that Inspector General found the threat to be credible, urgent, and of potential danger to our national security, that's something we all have to worry about. I take my oath of office to do that. So at that point, it was September, we moved to have a process of formal investigation. And it was 4 committees of the House, but Adam Schiff, chair of the House Intelligence Committee, that was leading the investigation of just trying to gather the facts. That's what we have to do, is gather the facts. They did that. Many people refused to testify. A lot of people would say there's been a lot of obstruction of justice. But they made the report of the Intelligence Committee. You saw many people here have seen, when they were doing the closed-door hearings, I didn't know any more than anybody else watching television. When they moved to the open hearings, I know what came out at those hearings. I have the Intelligence Committee report that I have read. I'm going to reread it this weekend. But they made a recommendation to the Judiciary Committee on their findings, some very serious findings, that the president had tried to use his position for political gain and had tried to obstruct justice. So it then got reported from Intelligence to the Judiciary Committee, which is the committee that does drafting of any recommendation on impeachment. That hearings were held publicly with scholars who know what our people want to understand in the Constitution what is grounds for impeachment. Those hearings were held. You have seen this week markup. I have not read what the Judiciary Committee has recommended because that vote only occurred today. I will have a copy of what's been recommended and then it will go to the House floor next week. I'm going to take the committee report, I'm going to take what they have recommended and study it this weekend.
The full House then will at some point vote on whether to impeach.
We will next
Which simply means what? To bring charges.
We'll bring the charges next week. It'll be voted on. I suspect it'll be a partisan vote, though I wish that it wasn't. And then it'll be referred to the Senate for what we know as a trial.
Every that's the I guess the
that's
point.
Where the decision will be made. Every senator must be there. There will be in their seats from noon, 6 days a week, until the end of those days' hearings. The Supreme Court, Justice Roberts, the Chief Justice, will preside over that.
I say the Chief Justice, in one sense, acts as the judge.
That is correct.
And the 100 members of the Senate act as the jury.
Correct.
And they have the accusation coming from the House, the formal charges.
The charges. And the Speaker of the House will appoint members to be in
a sense, prosecute.
Prosecute, correct. I mean, these are the words that people understand. So it will happen in the Senate. They have to move very quickly once it has been sent over, so most people expect that that will dominate the Senate for the month of January.
And for almost, 120 years or 130 years from Andrew Johnson in the 1860s until President Clinton in the 1990s, impeachment hadn't come forward. Now this will be 2 in 3 decades.
Well, if you include
Yeah.
Richard Nixon, even
Right,
although
that-
he
right.
resigned before.
Before the
This
actual
is a very
charges.
sad time.
Yeah.
I mean, I would, that's why I think this needs to be a very transparent process. We need to talk in very clear, specific language about what the charges are, what the facts are. No one's above the rule of the law.
Right.
That is what keeps us together as a country, as a democracy.
What can be done in your mind to not have it be totally a partisan issue? Because it seemed in 1997, 98 with President Clinton that there were a few, I guess, that went against their party. You know, what would it take for a Republican to potentially in the Senate support it, or what would it take for a Democrat in the House to vote against?
Well, I think there will be Democrats in the House. I don't know how many that will vote against it. I think that this is such a grave issue that this isn't a partisan issue. This isn't, we don't put our finger in the air and say, what are people saying? This is a moral responsibility to study the facts. And when I take that oath of office, I take an oath of office to defend the Constitution and to fight for our democracy. I think all of us, every member that's elected, needs to take that responsibility seriously. But I'm an American, and I'm an American first. I'm not a Democrat. And they're not, we have to protect this country. So what's ever going to happen, I pray that all of us are going to start to worry about remembering what it means to be an American. I remember 9/11, which was one of the worst days in our country's history, but in the immediate time following it, how we pulled together as one. And we got to figure out how we're going to do that. It's very important. I think there's so many things contributing to it. I think what bothers me more than anything about the last few years is the lack of civility, the lack of respect, the lack of, we have to get back to respecting each other. You can disagree agreeably.
Right, and now, as I've said with working on campaigns myself, that in certain ways it's good to know how the other side thinks. Not to say that you agree with what they think, but to have a better understanding of how they get to it so that you can then, you could say, discuss and talk about things without it being an attacking way of doing it.
Well, you know, none of us is perfect. I'm not the same person I was when I've learned life's experiences. And people have different perspectives. We can learn from each other. God gave us 2 ears and 1 mouth for a reason.
Right.
And I think we've got to, life is growing, and compromise isn't a dirty word.
Right. You mentioned the responsibility you have, and in certain ways this raises the question, do you make decisions based on what you think is right and wrong? And to what extent do constituents and phone calls and emails influence that?
So I listen. I try very much to listen to people. I don't think this is a political decision that I'm going to make on impeachment next year. I try to listen to people to gain the facts and then put all the facts together and listen to people who have experience. I'm not an expert on every subject. None of us is. But we can learn from people that do have experience. So when you look at the broader set of issues, when we talk about the environment, we have to all get at the table. I have young people who really care and are scared about their future, and they get frustrated. Yet we've got to bring the people that are worried about their jobs to the table. You can't not talk to the businesses. People have to stay warm. We have to have energy to run the lights in businesses.
You mentioned jobs, and another thing that has occurred within the last 24, 48 hours is movement toward approval of the new trade agreement between the United States, Mexico, and Canada, sort of a modification of NAFTA. Where does that stand, and how do you see that potentially helping people in Southeast Michigan in your district?
So starters, NAFTA 1.0, I call these NAFTA 1.0 and NAFTA 2.0, is why we see so many empty factories. It's why Willow Run has sat there, because it shipped jobs overseas. So we need to have a new trade negotiation. NAFTA 1.0 is still hurting us, and we need to keep jobs here. I do believe we needed to work together to get to a better place. I am waiting to see the written language of what's going to be there. There are people that are strongly supporting it, and I share with the unions. Many of the unions have. Rich Trumpka, president of AFL-CIO, has supported it. UAW is kind of they're good things, they're bad things. That's where I am. We got to be really honest with each other. There aren't going to be plants that are going to come back to this country because of that. But will we stop or staunch the flow of jobs leaving? That's one of the considerations. But we still have a lot more to do. And we have a lot more to do, even if we do approve this, and we've got to see it in writing, and it's not, they haven't written it. You know, I've heard lots of people make promises.
I would say, it sounds like you've been through enough to know that what someone says and what is actually written down.
But we still have to do lots of other policies to you know, we need worker training policies. We need tax policies. There are many other things. Right now, in the last tax bill that this president passed that helped the billionaires, there are incentives in that bill for corporations to locate overseas. That's not okay. We've got to fix that. So there's a lot more that we have to do, and we need to be focused on those policies.
In the last minute or so, what other issues do you see yourself personally working on in 2020?
Well, I have a lot of issues I care about. I mean, the environment and healthcare are two of the things that I'm the most passionate about. You know, I believe every American's got a right to quality, affordable health care, and we have to figure out how we're going to provide that. But then we've got to do things to improve. I want to keep jobs in this country. So what are we going to do to make sure that we're growing the economy, protecting the economy? I've got lots of issues, but I know we're out of time, so maybe you'll invite me back and we'll talk about it broader.
It's always a pleasure to have you here, and keeping the residents of Ann Arbor and this area up to date on what's going on in Washington. Clearly, it's a difficult time with all that's going on, and I want to thank you for your efforts and your work, and we appreciate all that you do.
I appreciate being here. I wish everybody a happy holiday. It's going to be a hard one for me. And I want to come back. I want to talk about privacy and Facebook and Google. We didn't get near them today.
I want to thank our viewers for joining us today. Look forward to all the support you've shown over the last, 29 years we've been doing this. So thank you, and we'll see you soon. Bye.